Good afternoon, everyone. This is Barbara Gebhard. I'm the Assistant Director of Public Policy at 0 to 3, and I'm really happy to welcome you to today's webinar. Our webinar today is called Reaching Out, and it's on using consultants to support best practices in infant-toddler child care. This is part of a series of webinars and blogs that we are jointly sponsoring between 0 to 3, the BUILD Initiative, and CLASS, the Center for Law and Social Policy. And this whole series is focused on the Child Care and Development Block Grant and the first 1,000 days. Today we have 3 presenters with us, and we also have some others who are supporting the project. The 2 states that we're going to be hearing from are Connecticut and Maine, and we're really pleased to have them with us. From Connecticut, we have Deb Adams, who is a workforce specialist in the Connecticut Office of Early Childhood. And from Maine, we have 2 folks. Linda Labus is the Early Childhood Coordinator. She works in the Center for Community Inclusion and Disability Studies at the University of Maine. And also from Maine, we have Jill Downs, who's the manager of the Technical Assistance System. This is part of the Maine Roads to Quality Professional Development Network, and it's part of the Cutler Institute at the University of Southern Maine. And our webinar today is being sponsored by the Pritzker Children's Initiative, which is a project of the J.B. and M.K. Pritzker Family Foundation. There are several of us from 0 to 3 and BUILD who are supporting the webinar today. You can see my photo there. In addition, Myra Jones-Taylor is the Chief Policy Officer at 0 to 3, and she will be part of the interview process with the 2 states. Carrie McCann is the Associate Director of State Services with the BUILD Initiative, and Gina Capito is also with the BUILD Initiative as a consultant. And the 4 of us will be leading you through our webinar today. As BUILD, CLASS, and 0 to 3 planned this webinar series, we developed a set of principles. And 2 of these core principles are particularly relevant for our topic today. The first is about vision, strategy, and systems for babies and toddlers. So this one is about embracing a system approach with services that are affordable to families, available when they need it, and provided by well-compensated and effective educators. This includes not only the services that are directly provided through child care, but also strong and effective linkages across the system components, which we're really going to be focusing on today, and infrastructure and scale. The second core principle that is particularly relevant for our topic today is the teachers and educators who are serving our infants and toddlers, that they are empowered, competent, and well compensated in order to help infants and toddlers with their development and learning and to be supportive of the workforce. So today, over the next hour or so, we will have several objectives. We will be exploring the role of consultants in increasing the quality of infant-toddler care. We'll develop an understanding of strategies to coordinate across the various types of consultants. And then we'll explore the implementation of consultant pools with 2 state examples, one from Connecticut and one from Maine. Today we are using the chat feature because there are so many folks on the phone that we have had to put you in broadcast-only mode and keep everyone on mute. But we do encourage you to engage through the chat feature. And we can see that you're doing some of that right now with technology issues, but I encourage you to continue throughout. If you have comments or questions related to the presentation, to chat those in, and we'll pause at certain times during the webinar today to take those questions and have them answered by the presenters. So I'm now going to turn this over to Gina Capito with BUILD, who will frame what we mean by consultation. Gina?
Thanks, Barbara. Hi, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this important topic, thinking about how consultation and supports for quality in infant-toddler care can support the overall services delivered to the children and families. As Barbara mentioned, we are going to use the chat feature, and if right now you're not seeing the full chat, we are going to make that visible to everyone once we get through some of the tech questions the folks are having. So we will make it that when you post a question, your colleagues from across the country and across even our territories that are with us today will be able to see your questions and even respond to you. So there's an opportunity to hear back and forth among peers as well as hearing from us presenters. As Barbara said, what I'm going to start out with is just a little bit of context framing around this concept of consultation in order to ensure that we're all kind of working from the same playbook or sharing the same set of ideas around consultation. And one of the key things that we wanted to acknowledge as part of the frame of this is that we've been using the term consultation, and we're using it as a pretty large umbrella over a lot of different concepts. We acknowledge that there are many different types of individuals that fall under this category of consultants or consultation within your states. You may not use this term in your state or community for the individuals, but so we wanted to stop and make sure that we kind of share a definition for this, the concept of what's going on. I mean, what we're talking about is individuals that are providing technical assistance, training, support to child care programs, working with the teachers, working with the directors, the staff of the entities, the family child care providers, supporting them in the delivery of quality early care and education to infants and toddlers. So there may be a range of kind of funding for the work, where it comes from, that defines the role or the way in which a consultant, and the term that we're using as kind of a large bucket for it, defines and where the work comes from. And so that acknowledges that there's a lot of different types of consultants, a lot of different reasons that consultants are engaging with child care providers. In some instances, it's related to the participation in a QRIS, and it's a quality specialist looking kind of at global quality. We also know there's consultants specific to mental health services. There's consultants specific to inclusion. And all of these fall into this category, and some of the things that make for the variance are, again, how it's funded, what the outcomes that are desired, and kind of the achievements that are expected by having that support service available to the program, and the overall kind of titling of it often comes from those two places. So we want to acknowledge that your definition of what a consultant is, what you title those individuals, may vary from the term that we're using, but we want to kind of use that as an umbrella to encompass all of the different types of consultants. And as part of that, we want to have an opportunity to think a little bit about how that strategy of consultation for support, how it supports best practices in infant-toddler child care, and what the potential outcomes or impact are of it as a strategy. And we think that's another opportunity for us to ensure that we kind of have that opportunity to all be on the same page. You know, we know that consultation or support, direct supports to programs to enhance the capacity and the quality of services that are delivered by the programs have a real opportunity to make an impact. And so one of the questions then is kind of why this approach where we're bringing other professionals in to support providers in the delivery of their care and services. And one of the reasons is because we know that the workforce is critical to high-quality programs, and that consultants can directly support and work with that workforce. Particularly when we think about infants and toddlers, the workforce is the relationship in which child development is occurring, and it's the relationship in which all of their learning is occurring 4 births to 3. So that teacher, the caregiver, the educator that we define kind of as the workforce, those are the individuals that have made that one-on-one relationship with the young children in their care, and where all of the nurturing relationships that their development is occurring within are going to happen. And so it's really critical that those individuals have the supports that they need for their capacity, their training, their education, their expertise, in order to really make the most out of those nurturing relationships and really understand the impact of those nurturing relationships. And another reason that why consultation is a really great approach to think about this is that because it has the ability to support the best practices in that day-to-day care for infants and toddlers, and to do that over time with the workforce and over time with the providers and the professionals that work in the family child care homes, the child care centers, the early care and ed programs. So it kind of can be tailored to the individual needs. And so when we think about supporting those best practices, there's a couple big categories that continue to support this idea of why consultation that help us to think about the type of work that consultants are doing. And hopefully as you're seeing some of these and hearing some of these additional definitions, you're starting to think, oh, okay, so they're referring to it as a consultant. We call that person a trainer, or we call that person a TA specialist. And so you're starting to kind of draw parallels between your individual context and this broader concept of consulting, which I think will really help you to then hear from our state examples and really think of ways that you might be able to move some of the same practices in your state or community. And so some of the supports that consultation as a strategy can offer is that idea of really facilitating practice change. And what we mean by this is, again, this idea that they're working one-on-one with the caregivers and providers, and they're really meeting them where they are developmentally as professionals, the knowledge that they bring, the expertise that they bring, and their goals for their ongoing capacity building and their ongoing professional development. And then because they're working with them in that one-on-one way, they really can tailor and have action plans that are specific to those individuals, which we know then have the ability to enhance the adult-child interaction that those providers and caregivers have with the children, which again goes back to kind of fundamentally what we know is quality infant-toddler care. We know that that type of facilitating practice change can improve the quality of the classroom setting, the family child care home setting, kind of the overall environment and dynamic and climate that's established by the professional that's providing care to the children can be improved with the support of consultation and targeted consultation. And that it can work on specific strategies that really think about children's development, such as mental health consultants that are really supporting professionals to understand social emotional development and skills in young children and understanding their relationship in how they support the development of social emotional development for young children. Another way in which consultation is really supportive is because of the nature of it being in that one-on-one type of way, that it's happening at multiple levels within a program. So the example of we're thinking about social emotional development, we're thinking about things there at the child level, and we're really working with a professional or the teacher at the child level. But we also know that consultation has the ability to be thinking at the overall classroom level as well, and then thinking about kind of the climate of the whole classroom. And then also consultation is thinking about how do all of these things function within the broader program and the system that is the program that the classrooms and the children are part of. And so thinking about working at each of those levels and that what each of those levels need varies and how you approach each of those levels. And that's one of the benefits of consultation is it has that opportunity to kind of tailor it in. A couple other ways in which consultation supports programs is then along those same lines of thinking about the overall program is it's an opportunity to support the leaders of the programs in how they develop the work environment, the climate in which the staff work in, the support that the staff receive in order to be able to deliver the high quality care and to have the skills that they need to provide those nurturing relationships to children. I mean, that's all kind of is built in with this idea of supporting the leadership of the overall program or center or family child care home. And then, as we've talked about kind of along the way, is the idea that there is specific expertise that can then be brought to bear. So mental health consultants, inclusion consultants, quality support specialists, there's different types of consultation and support that brings different expertise to the table that can be plugged in or used based on where the program is and their need. And so to that point, we know, and I've used lots of these different terms in the last couple minutes already, but you see that there are a variety of types of consultants that exist probably already within your states and communities. As you kind of look at this list, you're probably familiar with some of these names. Maybe a few of them are new. And that's one of the things that we want to acknowledge as part of thinking about the opportunity that we have to really focus intentionally around infants and toddlers with CCDBG funding and with our great state examples that we have today, is to pause and think about the idea of how do these consultants work together? What is the relationship among them, and how do we maximize the opportunity by having these individuals working together, if you have more than one of these in your state or community, to align and coordinate for more impact for programs? And so what we want to do is just take a quick minute and actually have you complete a poll where you take an opportunity to tell us which of these consultants does your state or community have. So if you would just take a second, check as many of these as you have in your state or community that you're aware of, and we'll see kind of where we fall as a group. while you're doing that, I just wanted to note that I shared a resource on NACCE's definitions related to consultants and supports for programs. I shared that in the chat box. Another resource that we'll make available through the landing page for the webinar series. So we've got about just over half of us have responded with the types of consultants that you have in existence already. So I'll just give it a couple more minutes to see, and then I'll share the results so you can see kind of scope of types of consultants. Looks like responses are slowing down a little, so here in about 20 seconds I'm going to close the poll so then we can all see the responses. And if I do close the poll and you were struggling with either completing it or hadn't quite put your answers in yet, you don't hesitate to share your answers as well in the chat feature as we continue to talk about this idea about the many different types of consultants that exist and how they coordinate or work together. All right, let's take a look at the results together. So you can see, and acknowledging again that what we were doing here is kind of thinking about all of the consultants. So there are states and communities that you've picked more than one of the categories that were included there on the list, and that demonstrates that there are a lot of overlap. We have communities and states that have the QRS TA specialists that also, just looking at the numbers, have mental health consultants, and then also in many instances also have infant-toddler specialists that are working with programs. And often we acknowledge that these consultants and specialist roles are going out to and working with the same programs in many instances. And so we start to kind of think about, well, what does it mean to work together as a consultant group or at a system level in order to ensure that we're kind of maximizing impact. And so part of what, as thinking this through as far as kind of where are we in doing this work is what we have to acknowledge. And that's the kind of stages of coordination of consultant work is a concept that we want to introduce and just kind of prompt us all to reflect a little bit on where we are in our individual communities or states as far as working to coordinate consultation. And we acknowledge that it is a bit of a continuum. So we start with this graphic on the left. You see, we have a lot of consultants that are working, and we see from the poll that you all have lots of consultants that are coming in and out of your programs. And there's the possibility that we're kind of at the beginning stage of creating capacity to better coordinate those consultants. But they're really kind of individuals going out, doing their work with programs, and working on their individual set of outcomes for programs. Kind of moving along the continuum then, we often start to do a little bit more capacity building and start investing more in the idea of coordinating consulting for impact. So we start to kind of organize things around maybe like topics. So the infant-toddler specialists are working more closely with the infant mental health specialists and kind of starting to work because they're both focused on the birth to 3 population. So, we kind of started, the middle of the continuum is that we're starting to work together by an organizer such as the age of the children or the region of the state that you're working in, and we start to coordinate a little bit better. But kind of the far end of the continuum, and the next graphic that I want to share with you is this idea of how coordination and the stages of development of coordination actually can move us towards maximizing impact and that potential of what it would look like for really maximizing impact. And that's part of what we're going to share today with our state examples is this idea of that all the types of consultation are coordinated and aligned. And kind of no matter how many of them that you have, if you have more than one consultant that's working with programs, you have the opportunity to kind of achieve this sort of where the puzzle pieces in the middle represent the idea that the goals for the different types of consulting and support are shared and aligned for programs. So we're all working off of the same roadmap for the programs and finding kind of our piece of the puzzle of the work that we do as a consultant. So it doesn't mean that the program wouldn't still have possibly 2 or 3 different consultants. That's one potential model, but that behind the scenes the consultants are working together on a coordinated plan for that program and all have their piece of the work on moving the program on their goals. And that's one way to think about this kind of end of the continuum of coordination and maximizing impact of the consultant pool. and what we're going to share today as we move into a dialogue with Myra leading us with our state examples from Maine and Connecticut is to think about the models that they've used to really think about how can you maximize and move to that kind of highest end of coordination of your consultants and what the potential impact can be and what strategies to achieve that would look like. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Myra to start us out.
Great, thanks, Gina. And thank you, everyone, for listening. It's really exciting to hear all of this work. And then, of course, one of the most important things to do is hear from folks who are on the ground, farther along in the continuum, thinking about how to get everybody in this stage of coordination. So I'm so happy to be part of this conversation. So Deb, I'll start with you, and I'd love it if you could tell us about the work in Connecticut around various types of technical assistance providers to infant-toddler child care programs.
Sure. Thanks, Myra, and welcome, everyone. I'm glad to be here. In Connecticut, we see the work of technical assistance providers to be inclusive as well as cross-sector, meaning that our trainers and coaches, consultants, and mentors need to be able to work with diverse family structures, settings, adult ages, and capabilities. So we have two foundational documents. We really think about this work of what do people need to know and be able to do the work in programs in center-based, whether family homes, as well as individual working with parents like in a birth to 3 situation. And so we have two foundational documents, one being a Connecticut core knowledge and competency framework for all professionals working with young children and families, and another being the core knowledge and competency framework for technical assistance providers that help support those adults who work with young children and families. So the interdisciplinary approach is really something that cuts across both documents, meaning that to get this work done, we had to really look at and bring to the table people from the field of education, special education, early intervention, health, mental health, and social services to help create these documents. And so it really does kind of give an essence of figuring out what we share together. So when we think of really what all of our unique roles, whether you're in the role of a coach or a consultant or a mentor or a trainer, what do we share together as a common idea or a common understanding? For example, a common understanding meaning that learning happens in the context of a relationship. Well, what differs across roles is maybe how that relationship occurs and is cultivated. Might be a little bit different depending on what role you're playing. Another common area that is across all of these different unique roles is this idea of dispositions to do the work. And so we adopted the dispositions section of the Region 1 Office of Child Care Guide to Effective Consultation with Settings Serving Infants, Toddlers, and Families. And we see that as really a foundational core idea in the document working with technical assistance providers. And so our emerging work that we're doing now actually is to build out the roles of home visiting and birth to 3 and mental health. What are some unique competencies that birth to 3 providers from Part C need to know and be able to do that isn't common across everybody else? So our approach really was to talk to a lot of people across disciplines and to think of an interdisciplinary way to bring groups of people together to say, what do we share in common about how we do our work and provide technical assistance to the field. So that's where we started. And our Maine colleagues, Linda and Jill, have more to add to the story from Maine's perspective.
Great, thanks, Deb. Jill and Linda, I'd love it if you could add your story.
I wonder if Jill or Linda are still muted. Myra, it seems like maybe we're having some technical difficulties with Jill and Linda. Do we want to go ahead to the next question for Deb, and then we'll come back?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So while we're waiting, Deb, I'm going to put you back on the spot, and we could advance the slides. So I would love to hear what the impetus was for trying to better coordinate those folks providing technical assistance to infant-toddler child care programs. Why do this in the first place?
Sure. Why do this in the first place? Sure. I'm trying to go, actually, there we go. So, I think Connecticut and other states have always known that a better coordinated system of technical assistance is the right thing to do, but it's hard to do. And so when the Transforming the Workforce report came out in 2015, that kind of gave us all a shot in the arm to really look at things, because it provided us the synthesis of the research and practice. And that helped states to really think and move forward about their integrated systems work. And so there are 13 recommendations from this novel, and here's just a few that I pulled out that speak to the idea of coordination and consistency. It's sort of wordy, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but as I mentioned before, to build an interdisciplinary foundation, not only in higher education for child development, but in general in terms of systems. So thinking about improving the consistency and continuity for children for ages birth through age 8 by strengthening that collaboration and communication among all professionals. And so how do you build a system around that? And also CCDF funding and the new requirements for professional learning. That always that is right there in the forefront in our thinking. It helped us to kind of really think about who we're serving, where we're serving people, and who we have to think about the different settings. We really had to sit down and think, where are all the children? And they're everybody's children, but they are in all different kinds of locations. So who are the early childhood workforce? And so that interdisciplinary group that I talked about earlier, we sat down and we really thought about that from the perspective of health, mental health, intervention, education, and we came up with teachers and caregivers, assistant teachers, administrators, interventionists, home visitors, and our technical assistance providers are really the people who are supporting a diverse group of people in all types of settings, not one setting or another, but all children, all settings, all the time. So the future forward look is really what we like to kind of glom onto. It's not about what we're doing well now, it's about what we need in the future. And if we want a trajectory of continuous growth for children and families, then our systems need to reflect that growth, like a mindset as well. So that's what's sort of carrying us forward, and the impetus really was the CCDF funding and the new rules, as well as the Institute of Medicine report that really grounded us in the research and the foundations. And Myra, as you know, coming from Connecticut, I would carry around my big book all the time, all tabbed, and bring it to meetings and have those rich conversations with my colleagues and people in the field. And so that's what's really carrying us forward.
That's great, and yes, I do remember that, and I love the comprehensive approach to all of this, so making sure that all children are served wherever they are. I'm wondering if Jill and Linda have been able to join us.
Yes, can you hear me? This is Linda.
Yes, great. So I will ask you, I'm not sure if you heard the first question, if you can tell us about the various types of technical assistance providers to infant-toddler child care programs in Maine.
Yes, sure.
Tell us about your work there.
Welcome, everyone. I'm pleased to be here, and sorry about the technology snafu. So bringing us back to our slide, I think it's 18, we're going to go back. So talk a little bit about our big picture, and a lot of what Deb's talking about from Connecticut, we kind of are echoing here in Maine. We have on this slide a picture of what at the top is the Maine Children's Growth Council, which is an established council in statute since 2008, charged to achieve sustainable social and financial investments in healthy development of Maine's young children and their families. I bring that up because that in tandem with the next tier was sort of the impetus, serendipitously, in getting to more of the coordination in Maine related to consultation and infant and toddler care. On the left-hand side, if you're looking at the slide, the PDAT stands for a subcommittee of the Maine Children's Growth Council, which is the Professional Development Alignment Team. And our charge is to integrate early childhood professional development systems in Maine, birth through age 8. This particular group has worked over the last couple of years looking at what is the TA delivery system in Maine so that we could better understand who's doing what and what gaps and needs are there overlaps, and how do we do a better job of coordinating. And at the same time on that tier, again, one of our grantee agencies, Kennebec Valley Community Action Program, received an Early Head Start Child Care Partnership grant, and with their funding, they were able to help us look at technical assistance competencies. How do we look at an integrated system? So next slide, Jill. The Professional Development Alignment Team, as well as our system, has all the different players that are represented in early care and education. And actually, we go into the school age, but for this, it's infant and toddler. So I won't read all the players, but there are a diverse group that we know of. And one of the benefits in Maine is we pretty much know each other, and we're at the same table. So coordination happens in different groups, and we all can kind of speak from the same place. And I'm going to turn it over to Jill. Hi, good afternoon. I'm going to continue talking about our vision that we have borrowed for the glossary of training and technical assistance from NAEYC and NACWA. And this really looks at the professional development picture. And what we know is the education, training, and professional development components, the technical assistance, at the intersection of all of them is where we see the greatest impact and outcomes. And our definitions really come from this glossary. This glossary comes from, again, the National Association for the Education of Young Children and the National Association of Child Care Resource and Referral Agencies. And they were the lead in an initiative that lasted from 2009, 2010. And many experts from 44 states contributed to this glossary. And so when we say that we don't make up the definitions, we mean it. It was a source and a group of others that did that and contributed to it. So when we look at this definition for technical assistance on this slide, this is really the core of the work that we have done in Maine, and we use this definition frequently in our work to be very clear about what it is we're talking about. This also may look familiar to you, what the technical assistance professional is, and those components are mentoring, coaching, consultation, and peer-to-peer network. What we have focused on in Maine, in our Maine Roads to Quality Professional Development Network, is we've developed this visual of technical assistance, and it's all tied to the Quality for Maine standards, and that's foundational for all of the technical assistance that we provide. We look under the consultation section. There are 3 components. We have general requests for assistance that come in through the Professional Development Network. We also have an inclusion warm line, and this contains information and resources to support successful inclusion of children with special needs, disabilities, mental health needs, and concerning or challenging behavior in early childhood and out-of-school time programs. And this is staffed by inclusion and mental health consultants from the CDN. People can access us through email or phone. The other piece is the on-site consultation,
And this is the individualized support to programs and practitioners using a partnership approach. It's available statewide and available to child care centers, family child care programs, out-of-school time programs, Head Start, legal and regulated providers, and nursery schools. We have developed a team of district early childhood and youth coordinators, also known as DCs, and they're aligned with Maine's child welfare districts. Having the regionally based DCs allow for connection with local programs, stakeholders, and service providers. The DC expertise in this group, there are 8 of them. They have expertise in infant-toddler care, mental health, inclusion, accreditation, family child care, center-based care, out-of-school time, and pre-K. They consult on a variety of topics related to the standards within Quality for Me. All consultation follows a specific protocol, and all data is tracked in the Maine Road to Quality PDM registry, which is Maine's professional recognition system. We do also have Infant-Toddler Credential 1 and 2, which is another thing that the district coordinators provide support around to help practitioners with all of their training needs, portfolio development, with the ultimate goal of awarding those credentials.
Great, thank you. And before I ask you the next question, I want to remind everybody who's listening to please send some questions our way using the chat feature. We would love to hear from you, and we're going to ask you or respond to your questions after Jill and Linda respond to this next question. So, Linda, I wonder if you can, and Jill, if you can tell us just the impetus behind trying to better coordinate all of these folks in Maine who are providing technical assistance to infant-toddler child care programs.
Sure. This is Linda. And as the slide says, basically we wanted to unify the system in Maine across our sectors, systems, and programs and organizations. Again, we didn't want the end user, which we call our TA partners, those professionals working in infant-toddler programs and home visiting programs, early intervention, home visiting, and Part C, to have multiple people with multiple definitions and understanding of what technical assistance is within those unique roles that we described and talked about earlier through the definitions that Jill talked about. So basically we wanted consistency and also to work on professionalizing the field of technical assistance for the professional. So what do they need to know and what can they look at as far as the competencies that they would need to know and be able to do as professionals working to support those working with the infants and toddlers and their families. Which brought us to a place where I spoke about earlier with the funding and support we received from the Early Head Start Child Care Partnership Grant and a partnership with I think you can take the next slide, Jill, the Professional Development Network, my organization, but foundationally the Kennebec Valley Community Action Program. We formed a core team to look at developing technical assistance competencies. And in the slide, the previous slide, there's a hyperlink in their downloadable resource for others. We too used a number of source documents, but highly used in a great deal the 0 to 3 Region 1 documents for the competencies for infant and toddler consultants. And we too adopted the dispositions from that document. Again, what's great about our field is why reinvent the wheel when there's something really good to look at those dispositions as well as knowledge and skills.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. Now I would like to turn it over to questions. So we're hearing some questions from folks who are listening in.
Myra, we do have a question. We have the question is wondering, along with better coordination, what supports are in place to support the consultants, the TA, the coaches themselves?
Great. Deb, Linda, or Jill, you want to take a stab at it?
Sure. This is Deb in Connecticut. There's a lot of supports that we're thinking of providing. We're in a place in Connecticut where we had a good handle on our core knowledge and competencies first and then built the system around that. And so we're in a position now where with an influx of some of the CCDF funding that we're ready to launch a more comprehensive system of supports. And some of the things we're thinking about actually is coming up, I believe, Myra, in one of your questions. So I don't want to give the answer away, but let's just say professional learning communities instead of training on trainings is one idea of kind of helping our technical assistance providers to model a way of doing things in a professional learning community while also building their own professional learning community.
Great, thanks. Jill or Linda, anything to add from Maine?
Can you repeat the question, Myra? Sorry.
Sure. It says, along with better coordination, what supports are in place to support consultants, technical assistance providers, coaches, etc.? So what other supports are you all providing?
Well, again, I think we'll be talking more about that, but one of the things that I would say is we're mapping out through the professional development alignment team where funding comes from, and then inviting our partners in different sectors to participate, whether it's in the content specific areas and those who may be providing that kind of content, age specific focus, or the type of unique role they're playing in the technical assistance arena. And so we're really looking more and more at how do we do a better job. And when you showed that other slide about coordination, I wouldn't say we're at the far end. We're still moving on that continuum, but we're getting better at bringing in our other partners so that we can speak together about the unique roles that we're playing with infants and toddlers.
Great, thank you. Well, I don't see any other questions, so I will go ahead and advance. So one thing that I just love, both Maine and Connecticut, the holistic approach to working with technical assistance providers. I'm curious, though, given that you're working with folks who come from many different disciplines or who are working in different settings, how you ensure that all technical assistance providers have a common core knowledge and skills. And I know, Deb, you've talked about this a little bit, but I'm hoping you can elaborate on this.
Sure. I think it starts with a mindset that if we think about the mindset of competency growth, that can be really the common thread and connection across all sectors of training, whether it's in-service, pre-service, or job-embedded coaching. This idea that pre-service is really not in-service, I think is a little bit, I don't know, old or new, but every time I ask a question of higher ed, do any of the people in your classes work in the field? And most people are saying yes, they are going to school at the same time working. So is it truly pre-service, or do they come with a base of experience, and are we adding to their competency? So this mindset of first starting with that competencies can be a connection across in-service and pre-service, I think is really important. But doing that, sometimes you can zoom in on competencies to such a finite level that it sometimes narrows your vision to the point when you forget where you stand in relation to the rest of the early childhood field. And I always like to use Horton in this example. Sometimes we look so microscopically that you have to see the forest through the trees and zoom back out in terms of what this means in terms of a system approach. And this is where zooming back out and thinking about professional development and professional learning, two different things. Helping someone advance themselves in their position and also helping someone learn about things. And this is how we think about, in Connecticut, systems and how best to deliver the learning and continuous supports that individuals need in programs. Now, we don't want to send everybody into an identity crisis necessarily, and to be thinking that, what you know, what you don't know, what you need to know, and make it a checklist of things that you need to do in order to keep your job or in order to keep advancing into the system. We really want to think about this as growth and to think about it in terms of what do we all have in common. So I kind of threw up here a little bit of an example from our actual competency documents for professionals. When we look at an example of, say, working in a center-based program with infants and toddlers at the professionals level, we want our workforce to demonstrate communication skills that create a safe and welcoming environment for children and families, and that's straight out of NAUIC. Now, how that might look for a technical assistance provider who we might be calling a home visitor, it looks more like a coaching item, that the home visitors actually coach the family and or caregiver to identify the language they need to communicate a safe and welcoming environment. So this is what I mean by sort of thinking about it's not something new and different, it's just how you do it might be new and different depending on your role and where you work. But we all have a common idea of communicating skills that create a safe and welcoming environment. And again, it's a mindset of growth, not just into the thing that providers need to do in order to meet some requirement, but that this mindset should permeate the way the state builds and implements its systems work as well. So I'm sure Maine has some comments on your question.
Hi, this is Linda.
Great, Linda.
And I'll respond to what kind of support do we ensure that technical assistance providers have a common core of knowledge and skill. So we did, too, start with those competencies to identify what the TA professional should know and be able to do. And in this circle, again, it's part of the document from Region 1 on the infant-toddler consultant competencies, showing that it's really cyclical and interwoven, that we look at knowledge, we look at skills, we look at disposition. And then the next slide really talks about the continuum of professional development support that we want to give our TA professionals, similar to how we want to we parallel that to TA professionals who support or professional development support staff who support our infants and toddlers who are working in the field. So again, as Deb and others have talked about, we don't just look at the competencies, but how can we now look at training that the TA professionals need as a common core? Will this lead us to a credential and then ongoing support to the TA professional for their work and growth and development? And we'll expand on that a little bit to see where we are at this point. We're moving forward. So we're looking at a training package that's in the process of being developed with the idea looking forward to a TA professional credential. And what we have in place now is a course, 18-hour online training called Teaching the Adult Learner. We also have a training that's 9 hours for professional development, portfolio development. We just finished writing and field testing with the district coordinators that Jill spoke about, the 18-hour Foundations of Relationship-Based Technical Assistance. And then we're looking at individual 12-hour trainings that look at the unique role within the technical assistance professional role. So we have a Foundations of Collaborative Consultation, which has been, again, developed and field tested by our district coordinators, who at the same time, in tandem, we're getting orientation, so it's been an optimal situation for our team. We just finished developing the Foundations of Mentoring, and we'll be teaching that to a child care apprenticeship program. And then we're in the process of developing foundations of coaching, and we have in place a 9-hour online introduction to communities of practice that we're going to expand into a Foundations of Peer-to-Peer Network, another 12-hour training. The next slide will show you that what we're hoping, and we're looking at funding support to do that in the state beyond what the professional network can support, is looking at this all leading to a credential. And so our idea is that people would take the training for teaching the adult learner, the portfolio, the relationship-based technical assistance 18-hour training, and then they could take one or all of the Foundation's 12-hour training, depending on their role or their role that they will be moving into. And again, it's not content-driven, it's talking about the process of technical assistance and the unique roles within.
One of the specific questions on that is over what time period are those trainings taken? Because it sounds like they're doing it alongside of doing the technical assistance and the consulting. So what time period are the trainings taken by TA professionals?
So the 18-hour adult learner and the 9-hour ones are done sequentially over the course of the 3-hour modules online, and they're done weekly. But it's sort of a self-paced. We go 3-hour module 1, 3-hour module 2, etc. The Foundations of Relationship-Based Technical Assistance, which was the 18-hour one, is what we call a hybrid model. So module 1 is a 3-hour online module. Module 2 is an in-person. So and module 3 is online, and module 4 is in person. And it's kind of tailored to the audience. With the district coordinators, we did it 2 weeks in between for the hybrid. I'm looking at Jill because she supervises the district coordinators. We will tailor it depending on the audience as we offer these. And the design of the hybrid is sort of foundational theory information, readings, things that you might engage with online, and then the face-to-face next module, 3-hour module, is practicing it, so applying. How do we role play? How do we look at scenarios that come up during the course of providing technical assistance?
So you all touched on this a little bit, but I know you have more to share about the strategies that you use to support technical assistance providers and their work working directly with programs. So Jill, I'm hoping that you can shed some light on that.
Sure. So we have an ongoing system of support for all of our district coordinators. So in addition to the training that they take and their experience in the field, we also meet face-to-face monthly. Doing slides and talking at the same time. So they also, we have a video conferencing group that meets once a month, and we also have communities of practice time for the consultants so that they can really process the work. There's a lot of information that they need to have, so we've split it up. Our video conferencing is really, these are the facts, these are the things that need to happen, how to do them, and then when we're doing our communities of practice, the topics really come from within the group, and we really focus on what are the challenges with the work, because in addition to providing on-site consultation, they also facilitate communities of practice themselves throughout the state. We have 25 communities of practice running at this point, and one of them does focus only on infants and toddlers. So it's important to process that with them as well. They've had a peer mentoring component to the work. So when they first began this position, and we're in about 10 months now, we started in October, we really paired people together who had more expertise in providing consultation with some of the folks that were newer. And then also they have individual supervision.
Great.
And all of this, again, goes back, we keep the circle of the competencies that were developed are our foundation. And we also have a self-assessment checklist that goes with the competencies so that our team really use the items in the checklist to determine their own professional development needs. So we try to tailor individual opportunities and options for them based on their input and their thoughts around the self-assessment.
Great. Deb, what about you? What's going on in Connecticut with support? Deb?
Oh, sorry, I was on mute. So I just talked to myself for 30 seconds. So, we wanted to hear from the field to figure out what the expertise is out there and what they needed and what they wanted. And so we're still sort of building our system. But a lot of the things that Maine described earlier, like adult learning, relationship-based practices, that's all part of our emerging criteria that we're going to say is going to be required for our technical assistance providers to come in with or accrue over time. But, for example, we had a coaching institute that was a wonderful collaborative across all of these entities you see here on the screen. And out of that came a lot of great information about what home visitors, coaches, consultants, birth to 3 providers. We focused on coaching, but we heard a lot of people saying, you know what, we want a professional learning a practice. We want to read books and have discussions. We want videos that are meaningful and relevant to us that we can use in training. So we're in the planning stages of developing that idea of that master cadre of TA providers that can actually help with a quality assurance system to go out and help people and mentor people in a TA role, seeing the TA role as something that can be a profession. So we're in the planning stages of developing that system. And I'll tell you, that coaching institute really yielded a lot of information. We focused on the 5 key characteristics of coaching from Rush and Sheldon to start off with a core knowledge of practices that all of our coaches should know and be able to do. And it was absolutely wonderful, and people are so sold on this idea of having a plan and being able to ask reflective questions. So we want to build the system in that model to think about providing people supports that help them reflect, that help them make their own plan, because that's what we want to see in the field, for people to reflect, build a plan, take action, think about things, get feedback from others. So we are still in the building stages of developing our supports for coaches, but we're utilizing the existing pool of people to really build upon that, and looking at a lot of other states like Maine who have a lot of the systems in place. We're just not quite there yet in terms of the funds to be able to truly implement statewide. So right now it's a little piecemeal.
Great. And so now I'm seeing some more questions pop up. So Gina, I'm hoping you can let us know what people are asking.
Actually, it's chat sharing right now, and just making sure folks have access to the PowerPoint presentation. So if we could hear move to the last question, the lessons learned. I think that would be helpful for folks.
Perfect. So you've shared a lot, Deb, Jill, and Linda. And I'm wondering, what lessons have you learned from your work? What would you do differently if you could do it all over again, or what are you thinking about doing differently as you move forward? Jill, I'll kick it off to you first.
Sure. So I think one of the most important lessons that we've learned is to really make sure that you define the technical assistance system. It took us a while to create that visual, but that really was a shift for us because we could look at all the components, and then from there we've been able to develop the orientation pieces, the training that was needed, the ongoing support, and to see how all of this is connected. Again, in our visual right now, it's the peer-to-peer networks and consultations that is the focus. And as we move forward with this, the mentoring and the coaching piece will also become part of our bigger picture. That's our hope anyway. We also want to make sure to tie the TA system to QRIS so that all of our consultation has to involve some of the QRIS standards. And it's very clear, I think, to practitioners what those are, and most all of the requests for consultation that we get really do fit in rather nicely. The TA professional staff orientation is very crucial to this work. Not only did they need to learn about the technical assistance piece, but they also had to be oriented to the university system, to Maine Road to Quality Professional Development Network, and to look at their own professional development needs. Those common shared definitions was really important, as Linda mentioned from the beginning, with the Growth Council and the Professional Development Alignment Team to make sure there's buy-in so that, again, there's commonality for all our partners when we're talking about what is technical assistance. The other thing that I always remind myself, and it's not in the slide, but it's always going to take longer than you think. And the time it takes to prep and think it through and to make sure that the staff is supported in a way where they feel confident and competent is really important for you. And the one thing we do differently, I'll make it quick, is to make sure you start with the competencies and standards.
Great, thank you. Deb, what about you?
You know, I think it's about perspective. And so the lessons that we've learned from the work is to make sure we have all the perspectives at the table and that we're intentional about seeking out various perspectives and challenge yourself and your colleagues to really flip the view, to really think of things outside of maybe your own discipline. I think we've learned a lot from that, bringing multiple players to the table, and oftentimes the ideas that are adopted by other groups and we talk about it actually brings us closer, and we say, hey, that's a really great idea. It's common to all of us. Why don't we adopt that? And so I think it's created buy-in into this work, which is fantastic. And, you know, to me, it's also about that mindset. I keep going back to some sort of a mindset. But, again, getting away from sort of like the checklisty and the zooming in on things to do, but really zoom back out and think of using like a metaphor so people can think deeper about their role instead of just thinking about a checklist. And so I always speak in a lot of metaphors and analogies. And so if we think about our providers as being choreographers or experiences and architects of knowledge and conductors of aha moments, that's really meaty. It's not just about the things we know, it's also how we do them. You know, one thing that I think we've learned from all of this is work groups. There can be work groups abound, and it's hard to manage tons and tons of work groups. And it's hard for people to really feel connected to their work group. So one thing that I think we could have done differently is to have an internal structure to facilitate multiple work groups at a time, where that we had more of an intentional of a connection between work groups, because we had two documents really running at the same time, and it was really hard to manage. So some easier ways to manage work groups, I think, would have been a better way to do it, and that's sort of like a lesson learned. So that's about it from Connecticut.
Great, thank you all
So now we have time for questions, reflections, or any additional comments.
Myra, there's a question about this idea of systems coordination and buy-in, and I think it's an important one, especially as we think about, and there was another question, so they're a little bit related, and I know we're short on time, so I'm going to kind of try and maybe weave a little bit of these concepts together. So we think about the fact that states are approaching an opportunity related to preschool development grants where there's going to be funding specific to thinking about birth to 5 infrastructure, and as I reflect on some of what we've heard from Jill, Linda, and Deb, we certainly, they've been working at a systems level. They've been thinking about infrastructure. And so as states are starting to prepare for new funds to support them on infrastructure, it brings to mind a couple of questions. And again, acknowledging we don't have much time, I'm going to start with the one from one of our participants, which was about this idea about beyond having shared definitions, how did they approach or what other challenges did they run into in getting buy-in across sectors? So kind of going beyond, we understand that they did that shared definition piece, which was critical, but what other strategies did they use to get to some of that cross-sector and shared system level work on supporting programs?
This is Linda from Maine. I would say giving people an opportunity to provide input and respecting that we all come from different places and we have a goal in mind, a common goal. So, for example, with the competency development, it was a series of core team members who were champions and did the actual roll-up-your-sleeves work, went out to the stakeholders from all our systems and sectors, and key to that is our Office of Child and Family Services at the Department of Health and Human Services, who have been supportive and are our heavy funders for the Professional Development Network through the Child Care Development Block Grant. And then we also went to an expert panel of people from across system and cross sector to do another round of review of the competencies. And then we had a rollout of all stakeholders to share in the document, learn about it, and talk about how would you use this in your particular system. So I would say, as we talk about infant and toddler care, we talk about relationships, and we talk about getting people on board by having true opportunities for them to share their own expertise and to join in, as opposed to having something done to them.
I think Connecticut. Deb?
Yeah, I would echo that, and I guess I would sort of focus in on the term relationships. Some of these sectors and groups of people don't necessarily work together, and in some instances are competitors per se. And so I think getting people together to talk about really what we have in common, which is working for children and families to help children and families be the best they can be. We all share that same goal, and I think it is that mindset of making sure people get together to have the time to share their story. And we find that in all of this work, we are sharing the same stories. It's the same goal. And once we get to that common ground, people buy in, and we can see more a likeness than really differences. And that's sort of made the difference for us.
This is Barbara again. I'd just like to wrap us up. Our time is about over today, but I really want to give a shout-out to Myra, Deb, Linda, and Jill for such a rich conversation today, and also to Gina for getting us started off on this topic. I want to wrap up a little bit with some recommendations so that you can think about how this might be applied in your own state. And we basically have two major recommendations. One is looking at the alignment across consultants, and we've heard a lot about this today. Being able to establish shared knowledge and skills that all consultants should have, doing some joint professional development, and then, of course, it's always all about relationships. So establishing those relationships among consultants so that they will work together on their own even more than otherwise might have happened. And the second recommendation we make is to really think about how you're using the quality dollars for the Child Care and Development Block Grant, and potentially for the preschool development grants that are coming as well, in order to develop specialists in areas if you don't have them, or to expand or better coordinate them if you do have a start at that. We've listed a few state examples here, and if you'd like to know more, please feel free to reach out to any one of us. But a couple of the things we wanted to point out as possibilities here are Washington's use of cross-disciplinary infant-toddler specialists. In Arkansas, they have paired the Child Care and Development Block Grant funds with Medicaid funds so that they're able to support the full-time positions of mental health consultants there. And in Arizona, they have promoted racial equity and addressed implicit bias through professional development to consultants in a variety of different disciplines. So these are some things that you might want to think about that really tie this back to the situation in your own state. I did want to give you a heads up on the next webinar in our series on Child Care and Development Block Grant and the first 1,000 days. It's at the very same time, 1 week from today. The topic of that is equity, and the webinar will hone in on recommendations for maximizing the block grant funds to address disparities and promote equitable outcomes. There are resources on the landing page, and you can see that in the chat that we've just put up there. Again, there's some great blogs that are up there, as well as previous webinars and a variety of resources. So thank you for joining us today, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.